I am pleased to introduce you to Vice Admiral Paul Boissier from the LBS Sloan Class of 2000. After an illustrious career in the Royal Navy, he became the Chief Executive Officer of the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, an organization that saves 500 people per year from certain death. His session, titled From Cold War to Cold Fingers, a reflection on practical leadership, will no doubt help us navigate a path towards the next 50 years of leadership. Get it? Navigate? Please put your hands together for Paul.
Thanks, Lloyd. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for that introduction. It's really nice to see the guys back here from the Windsor Castle. It's good to see you back here. I'm just wondering how much beer has been consumed and so how much heckling there's going to be. It's also really, really nice for me to be back here at LBS. I thoroughly enjoyed my time here on the Sloan Programme. It was just one of those defining moments of my life, and I'm sure I'm speaking for all of you when I say that. And I guess, if I had to say what it's left me with a bunch of really good friends, lifetime friends, and the extraordinary self-confidence that I've found to do some really tough things in my career since then. So it's been great. I think I should really, though, start by talking about the title of this talk, which is meant to sort of focus on a few reflections that I found about practical leadership in my time in the Navy and now running a major charity. But it started really with, in the Cold War, when I was a submarine captain in the Cold War, which is quite a challenging leadership environment. I mean, if you think about it, you take, in this case, 200 men away from home for a season. It's like going away now and coming back in the middle of the autumn. Take them away from home. There's no communications, anything like that. They're working 12 hours a day on 6-hour shifts, and it's incredibly intense, and particularly during the Cold War when, famously we were chasing Soviet submarines all around the North Atlantic. And after my career in the Navy, I left and got a job which I think is one of those jobs which, for me, is just a total dream job, running the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, RNLI for short, which is a remarkable charity. It's the 6th biggest charity in this country in terms of funds raised. We take no money from the government, and our annual turnover is about £200 million a year. So my job is to raise £600,000 a day from the generosity of the public and then spend it well. We have about 40,000 employees, 95% of whom are not paid, and we ask them at any time of the day or night to go out anywhere out to 100 miles from the coast in any weather to rescue complete strangers and bring them home to their family. And in the course of a year, we bring about 500 people back from the sea who would certainly have died. And we rescue and look after something like 32,000 others. We also actually run a whole bunch of lifeguards. If any of you go down to the beach at the moment, you'll see RNLI lifeguards there. And we're doing an increasingly vibrant international program as well, out in places like Bangladesh, Tanzania. And this year we're just going into Vietnam as well. During my time as a naval commander, and now as my time as chief executive of a major charity, I've been pretty much exclusively engaged in solo leadership posts for something like the last 35 years, first in a military context, and then in this context of being a chief executive of a charity, which is almost diametrically opposite the military ethos. But for all that, I don't really have any greater insight into the science of leadership than anyone else. For what it's worth, I seem to be able to make a fairly reasonable stab at it, and actually I really quite enjoy leading people. But much of what I can offer today is the result of painful experience and occasional success, rather than anything which remotely resembles academic brilliance. But leadership, as I'm sure you all know, is complex and it takes constant effort. In its purest form, it's a contractual relationship at an emotional level between two people, the leader and the person that he or she sets out to lead. Something like that's not at all easy to quantify, let alone to teach. Perhaps understandably, when I was a submarine captain in the Cold War, I thought that leadership was all about winning, taking your teams through a tough experience and coming out triumphant. I remember being invited to come and speak about the nature of leadership at LBS once, shortly after I completed my Sloan Programme in 2000, and while I was still in the Navy. I was speaking to an international audience, which included a number of French people, most of whom seemed to be sitting in the front row. I spoke about leadership as a means to an end, and that end was purely and simply success. And to illustrate this, because I thought this was important, I rather rashly, given the nature of my audience, questioned whether Napoleon was a good leader, on the grounds that he was ultimately defeated. I was nearly lynched. I was really lucky to get out alive by the French men and women in the front row, and rightly so. It was a ridiculous and naive proposition, and it was unhelpful and did nothing to help us understand the richness and subtlety of human behaviour that ultimately leads to both good leadership and great performance. Oops. Okay, I think I'm going to need someone to help me on this. There we go, well done. If I just say new slide, could you just turn it on for me, because otherwise I'm going to make a mess of this. Almost importantly, though, saying that it was all about success, it overlooks a critical issue that one of the most important ingredients of success is ambition. And an inevitable consequence of ambition is failure, periodic failure. If you're ambitious, you will undoubtedly fail from time to time. The more ambitious you are, the more often you will fail. And one of the ingredients, one of the really important characteristics of a strong leader, in my mind, is knowing how to fail, how to learn from it, how to avoid it happening again, but actually how to accept it and move on from it. If you can go to the next slide. Okay. So it's fair to say that my understanding of leadership has evolved over the years, thanks in no small part to my time here at LBS on the Sloan Programme. And I think that real leadership, that's to say leadership that creates an environment where ordinary people can do something extraordinary, is subtle, personal, bespoke to the leaders and their organisations, and that it's transactional. Just let me explain what I mean by transactional by briefly going away on a tangent for a moment. When I arrived at the RNLI, we had a very old-fashioned view of fundraising. So shortly after arriving there, I sat down with the fundraising director and his first reports to hatch out a new and a better model of raising money that would be genuinely sustainable into the future. Strangely, the model that we came up with that evening was not really about fundraising at all. It was all about the donors, or to be more precise, it was about building a relationship with the donors and letting them decide if and when they wanted to give us their support. Looking at fundraising over a 5-year horizon and not a single year, and just relaxing a bit. An important part of this was seeing fundraising through the eyes of the donor. That meant that we have to consider fundraising and volunteering for the RNLI, and we've got about 35,000 volunteers, as a transactional activities, whereby we offer the donor or the supporter something that they value personally in return for their time and their money. This could be naming a lifeboat after a loved one, or indeed a cat, as we've got out there, public or private recognition, or just companionship with like-minded individuals, which is the glue that sticks together many of the volunteers who give up their time for us. But the point is, these people will not stay with us unless we give them something that they truly value in return. Whatever the nature of that transaction is, it's personal to the donor or the volunteer, and it means a lot to them. And that means that they're happy to carry on working with us and for us in the future. It may or may not be surprising, but this slower, more personal and transactional approach towards fundraising and volunteering has been immensely successful to us. And it's made both our donors and our fundraisers feel happier. So then I started to think about leadership as a transactional activity as well. If leadership is about realizing corporate ambition, it will normally require you to do things that are challenging, complex, and demanding. But if you're going to ask your team to come with you on a journey that is challenging, complex, and demanding, not to mention all the uncertainty that comes with a journey of this nature, you're going to be asking a lot of them. And you have to reward them with something that they personally value in return. This reward is not just about money. Don't get me wrong, a fair salary is an important part of most people's work package, but it's not everything. People will undoubtedly respond if you offer them wealth beyond their dreams of avarice. But if their hearts and their emotions are engaged, they will respond even better. Just look at our volunteer lifeboat crews who do extraordinary things at any time of the day or night for no financial reward whatsoever. The reward that they get is the emotional fulfillment of saving someone's life. So I think there are actually two parallel contracts in play here, the material contract and a much deeper and more powerful emotional contract. The material contract is well documented. Most of us have a contract of employment backed up with a long arm of employment law. In return for an employee's efforts and time, the employer undertakes to provide fair pay, appropriate working conditions, respect in the workplace, safeguarding, inclusion, and much more besides. The material contract is important, and without it, the leader would find things very much more difficult. But it's the emotional contract which sets fire to a team and really makes things happen. And I just want to spend a few moments examining the nature of the emotional bond between a leader and his or her team. And I will say at this point that the things I'm going to say are how I see it. You may well see it differently, but I would urge you to think of it in your terms, from your perspective. I'll just try doing the slides again now. There we go. In my mind, the emotional contract has 4 specific components: vision, role, trust, and humanity. Let's start with the vision. The vision is the dream, and the leader is the dream peddler. I love this, which is the advertisement that Ernest Shackleton put in the Times before his bid to cross Antarctica in 1921. I'll just read it out, because it's a bit hazy. Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honour and recognition in case of success. Ernest Shackleton, 4 Burlington Street. This is the stuff of any young, adventurous person's dream, and it must have been absolutely irresistible to a certain type of person. It's no surprise that he received 5,000 applications to join him, and it's no surprise that they all worked so hard to survive when the expedition met a catastrophe. The vision, the dream, can take many forms depending on how you want your team to characterize their work. But it's a mistake to think that this is about facts or numbers or industrial output. It's not, it's about emotion, and the facts come later. In the RNI, it's much easier to inspire people with a single rescue story than it is by giving people statistics about the number of lives we save each year. Because the rescue story is all about real people, real lives, and real emotion. People like you and me. And we can relate so much more easily to that than we can to a set of numbers. And I'm just going to tell you a very quick story to illustrate that. On the North Wales coast, there's a lovely resort town called Rhyl, which has a big sandy beach and a lifeboat station. About 4 years ago, on a hot Saturday morning, a day very like today, in midsummer, the beach was full, and a few of the crew, with nothing better to do, had wandered down to the lifeboat station just in case someone got into trouble, and they would be the first people in the queue to get on the lifeboat and go and rescue them. At about lunchtime, someone came up to the big wooden doors of the lifeboat station and told one of the crewmen that he'd seen a man paddling out to sea on a windsurfer with no sail up. This is a true story, by the way, and he seemed to be a very long way out. The crew spotted him, almost half a mile out to sea, and they decided to launch a small lifeboat to go and check that he was okay. As they got close to the man, they found that he had his 4-year-old daughter sitting on his shoulders, and her younger sister, who was 3, sitting on his bum. And as they got closer still, they could hear the girl sitting on his shoulders saying, "Left a bit, Daddy," and he paddled to the left, "Right a bit, Daddy," and he paddled to the right. And he was blind. And he genuinely thought he was 5 meters from the shore in knee-high water, running up and down parallel to the surf line. So they scooped them all up, and the windsurfer, took them back to the beach, brought them back to Mum, who was reading a book and didn't realize that anything untoward was happening at all. And then with no fanfare at all, the crew took the boat back to the lifeboat station, washed it down, refueled it, got it ready to go out again, and got on with their day. But without them being there that day, that family would have died. As simple as that. And it's stories like this which get me out of bed in the morning. And I dare say that if you drive home this evening, or wherever you go this evening, you'll remember that story with much greater clarity than you will if I tell you that the RNLI saves 500 lives a year and rescues 32,000 people. Because it's the dream that catches, it's the idea, it's the human contact, the emotion that catches your emotion. But the dream must be authentic, it must be of value to your team, and you personally have to believe in it. The most compelling vision statement that I've managed to come up with for the RNLI is a world where nobody drowns, which is good. It's emotionally based, and who would say that it's not worth going for? But the trouble is it's too far away. It's too big a leap for the organisation. We won't get there during my time in the job. In fact, there's no one working at the RNLI who will see that come to fruition. So it's really difficult to relate for people to relate their day-to-day work to this vision. So as a result, we've broken it down into 2 smaller steps. For the moment, we're going for 2 intermediate targets, which is a 50% reduction in accidental coastal drowning in the UK and Ireland by 2024, and at the same time, a reduced risk of drowning in the countries that account for 25% of global drowning. Now, that's quite a big mouthful. That's quite a lot to go for in 2024. But it means that every time we rescue someone from the sea, every time we prevent someone doing something daft on the water, and by the way, men are far more likely to do daft things on the water than women, just so you know. Every time we hear of a community life-saving project in a small village in Bangladesh, we know that we are getting one step closer to our vision. And that is genuinely motivating. And that's why we work so hard to build a culture of storytelling across the RNLI, partly because the stories are quite motivational for us, but also because they give our staff, our volunteers, and our supporters the emotional ammunition with which to go out among the communities and communicate the effect, the excitement, and the impact of the work they're doing. And just to digress very quickly, I was telling someone just now, I've just been recruiting for a director over the last week after someone left the organisation. I had 6 people in. The first question I asked them is, why do you want to come to the RNLI? And 5 of the 6 said, because it's good for my career. And in an emotionally based organisation, that is professional suicide. You know, I don't want someone who's there because it's good for their career. I want someone who genuinely believes that no one should drown. And they had completely misread the brief in coming along and saying that. The second component of the emotional contract is a role of real value. I'm a big believer in delegation, letting people get on with their job, giving them the freedom and the authority to make decisions without having to always refer back up to the boss. As a submarine captain, when I took a submarine away into the North Atlantic for a 3-month operation chasing the Soviet Navy, I was left to make my own decisions within a clearly defined set of rules that we call the rules of engagement. And it was incredibly rewarding. We were in radio silence as well, so I couldn't ask for help even if I wanted to. I personally owned both the success and the failure of those missions. Now, you and I can do that for the people who work with us. Empowerment and delegation are enormous tools for making your team feel that they have a role of real value. And so is recognition. Like the man cutting the grass at Cape Canaveral, a leader must allow everyone the opportunity to feel they are personally contributing to that vision. This is important because it's how each one of us defines ourselves. And this is my PA's job description, job profile. And on everyone's job profile in the RNLI, the top line is, my job saves lives at sea. And you can see it's all written out there. And it's up to the line manager to fill that in before they recruit anyone to the new post. This isn't just vain posturing. It's an essential part of building self-respect within our teams, many of whom will never be lifesavers and go out on a lifeboat, but who nevertheless need to feel they're actively engaged in the work of saving lives at sea. The next component of the emotional contract is trust. The first 2 qualities, the dream and the role, both pretty much rely on the ability of the leader to fulfill his or her side of the transaction. But trust is different because it works both ways. For the relationship to work, the team must trust the leader, and the leader must trust the team. In my experience, trust is normally reciprocated, and so is the absence of trust. When it breaks down, it happens on both sides. But your responsibility and my responsibility as leaders is to actually trust people, actively take the risk of trusting people and letting them get on with the job, empowering them to get on with the job. And then you will find that they come back and trust you in return. And sometimes the depth of this trust is the only thing that separates success from failure. And I couldn't resist putting this in. I don't know how many of you are old, ancient like me, and remember the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. If you do remember it, you remember he came up to that chasm just before going across to actually recover the chalice, the holy chalice. And there was no obvious way across, and he had his ancient text in his hand. The text said, step out and, trust the book and you'll be okay. And so he did. And of course, there was an invisible bridge that he found his way across, and he came back. But I'm going to tell you now a real life example of this, which I find really empowering. Let me introduce you to Gary Clark. Gary is the painter and decorator in the small coastal community of Dungeness in the south of Kent. Kent is the county right down in the southeast of England, closest to France. And if you look at it on the map, there's a little triangle of land that sticks out towards the southeast. That's Dungeness. There's not much there. There's a few houses, a nuclear reactor, a lighthouse, and a lifeboat station. Gary is the painter and decorator of that community. He's also a hero. And he's a member of the lifeboat crew. And in a big winter storm a few years ago, the wind was blowing from the southwest right up into the Straits of Dover, right up in that narrow bit of water between England and France. And it was blowing a severe gale. It was a horrible day. And it met a big ebb tide coming down, working down towards the southwest. And when tide comes over wind, you get very, very steep, very high waves. And that day, it was about mid-December, the waves off the coast of Dungeness were between 8 and 10 meters in height. They were breaking, they were violent, they were really uncomfortable. There was only one boat out on the water that day, which was, can you believe this, a training yacht with 6 trainees who'd never been out in a yacht before and 2 instructors on board. It was impossible conditions. They should never have been there. And by the time we received the call for help, the 6 trainees and one of the instructors were all down below being sick. And the one guy who's left able-bodied on the deck had been thrown by a big wave breaking over the stern into the steering wheel, and he cracked 4 of his ribs. And only then did they ask for help, which again is crazy. So the Dungeness lifeboat went out to rescue them with Gary on board. When they got there in these impossible conditions, can you imagine this? 2 boats beside each other in these big waves. And there's just a moment of opportunity when you can get across from one to the other. And Gary and the coxswain of the lifeboat, the guy who was driving it, knew each other really well. They trusted each other really, really deeply because they'd known each other, lived in the same community since they were young boys. And it was up to the coxswain to get the lifeboat alongside the yacht and tell Gary when to go across. And at the precise moment, the coxswain leant over the side and said, "Jump." And God bless him, Gary jumped. He didn't say, "What, I beg your pardon," or over my dead body. He jumped, and he got across. And for the next 6 hours, he was on the front end of that deck. The tow rope broke 3 times. He was underwater for 20, 25 seconds at the time. And all he said to me afterwards, when I said, "That is the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said, underwater, it was really, really tough. And all I could do was think of my 14-year-old daughter to keep me holding on and keep me alive. For 6 hours, he was doing that. And we got the yacht towed into Ramsgate, and that man saved those 8 lives without a shadow of doubt. And it wouldn't have happened without that extraordinary bond of trust between those 2 guys, which allowed something really, really extraordinary to happen. And the final component, I'm just worried that I'm running out of time here. The final component is humanity. And humanity sits closely alongside trust because it's much easier to build trust and build an emotional bond with someone that you understand and that your team can relate to. Your team will build that bond with a human being rather than an emotional superhero. Every team comprises a collection of individuals, each with his or her own specific needs, their insecurities, their preoccupations, and their pressure. And as a leader, you have to find the time to understand them as individuals and allow them the time to understand you in return. That means a lot of face time. You must be able to actively listen to them, and you must be prepared to open up to them in return, because that makes them feel valued. There is, of course, a balance to be struck here in terms of just revealing yourself to your team. You've got to be authentic and honest about your feelings, because only then will the team understand and properly relate to you. But when things go wrong, they really don't want to hear you've got no idea what to do, that you're all doomed, and even if this is the last thing going through, the only thing going through your brain at that particular moment, is it really and truly, it's the best not to share that with your team. They need to trust you to get them out of trouble, which means that you have to be strong and resolute and creative under pressure. And that's really not easy at times. There's a singularity about leadership, which sometimes makes it a very lonely place to be. Before I was asked to be captain of my first submarine, by the way, you might be able to see the picture on the right is quite an unusual one. You can see there's a small sort of trace going up towards the top right. That's actually the wake of a torpedo fired at that ship, albeit aimed to go 6 feet underneath the keel, because it's an British torpedo and a British ship. But there aren't many photos like that, so I thought I'd just put it up there for the fun of it. But before I was asked to be, it's far more frightening, that exercise, from the ship's point of view than just from the submarine's point of view, you'll understand. Before I was asked to be captain of my first submarine, I was sent off on a long and particularly grueling 6-month training course. It was called Perisher because it had a really high failure rate. And one of the things that still sticks in my mind from this course is a conversation that I had with my teacher, who was an experienced submarine captain who was training us. One day, he said, you'll find yourself standing in the control room of the submarine beside the periscope. And you'll look round and find that everyone in the control room is staring at you, wondering how you're going to get them out of the mess you've just got them into. This is not the time to doubt yourself. All they want from you is a bit of magic. You may not know the answer, but you just have to draw on all of your experience and all of your intuition. And he said, that's what they call leadership. So I suppose that my musings on leadership have led me to a point where I now put much more emphasis on the emotional side of the relationship between the leader and the team than I ever did before. To articulate a vision that means something important to your team and to bring it to life for them. To let each member of your team know that they, as individuals, are playing an important role in delivering the vision. To trust them and allow them access to you so that they will trust you in return. And to be seen to be a human being, but without losing the strength of purpose and resolution to solve tough problems. None of this is easy. But if you can deliver that emotional contract with your team, you'll be well on the way to creating an alchemy that is, in my experience, unstoppable. But the one thing I will say is that without my year on the Sloan Programme here in London Business School, I would never have had the confidence, the self-confidence to do my present job and to make these experiments and to actually develop my sense of leadership. It was one of the most important and empowering experiences of my career. Thank you. Okay, can everyone read that? Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's in my experience, you're probably way better than I am, but in my experience, you do fail from time to time. I think the trick on failure and the way to avoid a leader's failure having a negative impact on others is actually to recognize that failure before it becomes catastrophic and before it becomes too difficult. And there's a lot of ways, a lot of people have been talking about that today. It's engaging with your team and actually being open to being open to the naysayers and always putting a balance on that, giving it a weighting the whole time. I think if you just collapse the team because of your pig-headed pursuit of a rubbish option, I think you deserve all the opprobrium that your team brings down on you. But I don't think people like us are like that. I think one of the things that this sort of education, this sort of group of people have is quite a heightened sense of self-awareness. And you know instinctively when it's not going quite right. And actually that's the 3 o'clock in the morning moment in my experience where you say, what can I do to make this better? What can I do to actually avert this? And in the RNLI, we've been pursuing one course really hard, a course of modernization for the last 10 years. And actually only about 6 months ago, I knew I was pushing people too hard by conversations I'd had. And I had to stand up in front of all the staff and a lot of the volunteers and said, actually, we're going to stop the modernisation thing. We're going to consolidate, and then we're going to carry on the modernisation thing in a couple of years' time, because I would have broken the organisation if I'd carried on that way. That was because I was able to listen to people. Or, put another way, they were so vociferous in telling me that I couldn't really get away from it. But you have to be prepared to do that. And I think humility is a really important part of leadership, actually. I think if you say, I'm the leader, you guys get on and follow me, I think you've lost it. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much indeed.